Thank you very much, Yaroslav. Greetings from Copenhagen to the organizers of this fantastic conference, to the attendees, both online and offline. I'm really pleased to be here today, at least virtually. Fortunately, it was not possible to come in person as originally planned. However, I'm delighted to be able to chair this session about Belarus-Ukraine, Belarusian Ukrainian relations, and just as a short introduction, we all know the situation in Belarus and Ukraine in separate, but how does the Russian invasion in Ukraine affect Belarus? How does it affect relations between Belarus and Ukraine in the political sphere, in the cultural sphere? These are all the questions that are bothering us, not only as scholars, but also as people who have interest in the region. In the last weekend of March 2023, the world was basically shaken by Russia's announcement of deploying its nuclear arsenal in Belarus. And the country is now viewed as merely an extension of Russia's Western military district. And meanwhile, Belarus is still trying, or the democratic Belarus is trying to keep away from the conflict with Ukraine. So we'll discuss those issues in this small panel. We are reduced. One of our colleagues was not able to participate, unfortunately, but I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Olesia Zhytkova, who has defended her PhD thesis in history and is currently a postdoctoral researcher in Dublin City University. She's a member of the historical agency Litopies Niezlamnosti, and she works within the field of contemporary history of Ukraine. Among her scientific interests are history of the Orthodox Church in Soviet Ukraine in 2030s, struggle for independence in Ukraine in the 20th and 21st century, the role of women in the fight for independence of Ukraine, and Ukrainian-Belarusian relations in 20th, 21st century. Today, Olesia will present her research on Ukrainian-Belarusian cultural relations in the 21st century, with a brief review of problems and prospects. So over to you, Olesia.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for letting me, for giving me this opportunity. Thank you very much, Lizaveta, for answering all my questions. I was really concerned that I've been lost somewhere because, I didn't get the link, the Zoom link. So I reached Lizaveta and interrupted her private life earlier, asking for all these questions. Where should I get the Zoom link? So finally, I'm here, and I'm really happy it worked out. And now I will share the screen. Yes, and tell me now, do you see it? Yes, I can see.
You can see the screen, and you might probably like to start a slideshow.
Yes. Why it doesn't want to?
At the bottom right corner, there is a little sign. Yeah, go lower at the very bottom. I think you're going up.
Oh.
Go to the bottom. No,
yeah.
Go at the top now. Go to the bottom of the screen. Or press F5.
Yeah, I'm pressing, but it's not working.
Okay, then go to the other side. Yeah, bottom to the lower. No, you're going in the wrong direction. bottom, go to the bottom. You are now in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
Then go to the right. Or maybe I should share. Yeah, even more to the right, even more.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then where is it? Let me try to share it from my computer. Unless you want to go to the, you see there's 59% written. You see at the bottom right corner. You're now in the middle. Go to the bottom right corner. Yeah, you go to the left now, a bit more to the left. Yeah, stay at the bottom, but go to the left. Yes, yeah, a bit more to the left. No, more, no, don't touch this one. Go to the left.
Ah, I see.
Yeah, this one. Yeah, slightly.
Yay! But it's not work. Oh, yeah, it's working now. Okay, yeah, somehow, yeah. Just I used to use F5 and that's all. So yeah, now I know another ways. There are several strands in bilateral cultural relations between Ukraine and Belarus in the 21st century, and the most interesting of which are relations between state structures and relations between the civil societies of the two countries. These strands often do not match each other in focus of effectiveness, the development the development of meaningful relationships. After the breakdown of the USSR, a new period of relations between Ukraine and Belarus began. Ukrainian historian Stepan Vasilishin has proposed a comprehensive analytical chronological framework periodization of Ukrainian-Belarusian relations since 1991, and using it we can identify the following stages of relations in the 21st century, and they are like this. So 2004, I won't I'll just share it and you can see it. I won't read it. So 2005, 2008, 2009, early 2010, December 2010, 2011, to 2012, 2013, and then November 2013, 2014, and yeah, at this stage his periodization ends, and I propose to extend the analytical framework after 2014 as follows. So 2015, 2020 is a transition to a relative stabilization in relations, which wasn't like this during the Revolution of Dignity in Ukraine. And the government in Belarus became a mediator engaged in problem solving in the Eastern European region. And then 2020, early to 2022, due to Ukraine's non-recognition of the results of the presidential election in Belarus as legitimate, relations were put on hold. And then since 24th of February 2022, Belarus' participation in Russia's full-scale war against Ukraine has led to a significant deterioration in relations with the renunciation of previously concluded agreements. And it has recently become known that Ukraine has recalled its ambassador from Belarus. And to a certain extent, this chronology can be used as a basis for an analytical framework for cultural relations between the nations. So it can be said that during whole 21st century, the relations were built regarding to the inner political events and due to the events in the region, such as Russia's invasion to Ukraine in 2014 and full-scale invasion to Ukraine in 2022, and of course also two Ukrainian revolutions, the Orange Revolution and the Revolution of Dignity, and protests in Belarus affected the changes in the cultural relations and in political relations. And at the official interstate level, relations between Ukraine and Belarus in the 21st century were regulated by a number of agreements. It is worth noting that a small proportion of them were related to cultural cooperation. So in 2003, the document on cooperation in the area of culture and arts was adopted. In 2006, in the area of tourism. In 2020, in the area of protection of historical and cultural heritage. And in 2017, the program of cooperation in the area of culture for 2017-2021, and the agreement on cooperation in the area of interethnic relations were signed. Following the first and the second forums of the regions of Ukraine and Belarus in 2018-2019, a number of other agreements were signed, which in one way or another also related to the cultural sphere. At the moment, a significant number of these agreements have been terminated by the Ukrainian side. So on the other hand, such agreements deepened contacts between the peoples. On the one hand. On the other, these agreements between the authorities of Republic of Belarus and Ukraine had certain peculiarities. From 2014 to 2022, relations between two states had a hybrid nature, when the Belarusian authorities were in close contact with the Russian aggressor, and simultaneously Ukraine and Belarus continued to develop relations. The embassy of Ukraine in Belarus made attempts to develop Ukrainian culture and support the diaspora. Thus, events have always been held to honor certain individuals, for example, Taras Shevchenko, Olesia Ukrainka, and aspects of the history and culture of Ukraine. In recent years, Ukrainian language courses have been organized with the assistance of the embassy. So in 2017, the courses were taught by Yegor Dzobik. And the following year, he was joined by Oksana Tsiplitska and Volga Borisenko. Over 80 people attended the courses during these years. With the help of the Ukrainian embassy, other events took place, such as Ukrainian participation at book fairs, organization of festivals, film screenings, and even fashion shows. For example, in 2018, the Days of Ukrainian Culture in Republic of Belarus were held with concerts in Minsk, Gomel, and the village of Alexandria. The Days of Ukrainian Culture in Belarus also included the Days of Ukrainian Movie in Minsk, where the film Cybers about the defenders of Donetsk airport was screened. In August 2019, a festival of Ukrainian culture took place in the center of Minsk, featuring performances by professional and amateur groups. Based on my personal observations, after 2020, events promoting Ukrainian culture no longer had as wide a footprint in Belarus. And however, even after the social transformations of 2020, the Ukrainian side managed to organize interesting events. So in 2021, the embassy hosted a thematic event dedicated to the 7th anniversary of the Revolution of Dignity, Maidan, where the book Belarus and Donbass by Igor Ilyash and Katerina Andreeva was presented, and the film Revolution of Dignity, Writing History was screened. After February 2022, the work of the Embassy of Ukrainian Republic of Belarus switched to a besieged fortress mode. The Embassy of Republic of Belarus in Ukraine has also held a number of events and promoted a number of initiatives throughout the 21st century. However, the effectiveness of these activities in promoting Belarusian culture is not always high. The non-governmental Belarusian structures that exist in Ukraine are also sometimes questionable as to their usefulness in representing the diaspora in an unbiased manner. For example, the All-Ukrainian Union of Belarusians was established in 2000 with the assistance of diplomatic representatives of Belarus in Ukraine. At one time, the union organized Belarusian language courses in Kyiv and other cultural events. However, based on the content of their website and the text of some interviews, it can be concluded that the organization sometimes represents an outdated Belarusian identity. Of course, many important topics for cultural cooperation remained unspoken, as Belarus is in the orbit of Russian influence. First of all, the topics related to the Ukrainian and Belarusian people's resistance to Russian rule in previous centuries and in modern times were doomed to oblivion. For example, there could be no intergovernmental events to commemorate the hero of Ukraine and participant of the Revolution of Dignity, Belarusian Mikhail Zhytkova, who was killed during the Maidan in Kyiv in early 2013. At the same time, every January, representatives of the Belarusian diaspora in Ukraine hold commemorative events to honor the hero. And despite the martial law in 2023, with the permission of the authorities, the memory of Mikhail Zhytkova was also honored in Kyiv. This year, the event was slightly transformed and expanded to include a march in memory of the heroes of Belarus in the armed forces of Ukraine who died resisting the Russian invasion. The Belarusian heroes of the Russian-Ukrainian war were also commemorated in the exhibition's colors of the Belarusian Revolution. The exhibition was held in 2022 in a number of Ukrainian cities, including Bucha. In addition to photos of heroes, it featured photographs of political prisoners imprisoned in Belarus since 2020, who are Ukrainians or whose fate is somehow connected to Ukraine. For example, there was a photo of me and my husband there because I'm Ukrainian and my husband is in prison for some reasons. The photos also show many Ukrainians who joined the demonstrations then or now after Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Thus, we can see that the gaps in relations can be filled with the help of proactive representatives of the Ukrainian and Belarusian peoples. And hence, the main problems in the construction of Ukrainian-Belarusian cooperation are the following. So the absence of a clear, consistent approach to relations between both countries and the system of its implementation during the years 2000-2022, antagonistic geopolitical objectives of state bodies conducting cultural policy, lack of a stable network of Ukrainian non-government organizations in Belarus and Belarusian non-government organizations in Ukraine. At this point, for stable, I mean that those Belarusian organizations who act in Belarus for in Ukraine for a long time and are representing not outdated Belarusian identity and Ukrainian organizations in Belarus which are still acting, because it can be seen that there was quite a big number of organizations in Belarus in 1990s, and as long as time passed and as long the political transformations have been held, the less organizations are now, and I think I'm not sure, but maybe all of them had been already closed or near that point. And of course, the next problem are stereotyping of the perception of the history, culture, and current living conditions, and increasing tensions in mutual relations after the full-scale invasion by Russia of Ukraine. And until February 21st, 2022, Ukrainian-Belarusian contacts were maintained at a certain satisfactory level, mainly thanks to individual initiatives of representatives of the cultural sector and civil society activists. Now, the average Ukrainian does not understand the fact that the actions of state bodies do not represent the attitudes and aspirations of the vast majority of Belarusian civil society. And Belarusians who are forced to make excuses eventually sometimes resort to psychological counterattack, especially on Facebook. So I assume that overcoming the crisis in relations is possible only in the period of post-war settlement of relations in the Eastern European region after the victory of Ukraine, of course, and work on the conceptualization of the nature of the future relationship between the two countries should be undertaken now, despite the non-state status of Belarusian civil society and anti-Belarusian, sometimes, yes, backslash on the part of some Ukrainians. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much, Olesia, for this very interesting presentation. I think we'll go on as follows, take the presentations first and then take questions from the audience to both panelists. And because we are only two in this panel, including me as a moderator, so I will go to my presentation. Just in a moment, I will share my screen with you. Now, I just hope to share the right one. Oops. All right, so please let me know if you're able to see my screen with a slide.
Yes.
Full screen. Okay, great, wonderful. Thank you so much. When I was applying for this panel, it was already a lot of discussion about Russian military and nuclear weapons on the Belarusian territory. And therefore, I put nuclear deterrence in the title of my presentation. I believe that this topic is very important. We can, on the one hand, study materials from the past and see how they relate, how they help us to explain the current situation. That was at least my goal. So I will try to deal with the topic of nuclear deterrence from the perspective of history, from the perspective of geopolitical consequences of the collapse of the Soviet Union, and discuss those consequences for Belarus and for Ukraine. Yaroslav has already introduced me. A few words, perhaps, before I start. I'm an associate professor at European Humanities University, where I teach world politics and international relations. I'm based in Copenhagen, Denmark. where I'm affiliated with Copenhagen Business School and Belarus Research Network for Neighborhood Policy, which is a project between the Danish Foreign Policy Society and Latvian Institute for International Affairs and the European Humanities University, of course. So in the last weekend of March, the world was shaken by the Russian announcement of the deployment of Russian nuclear weapons on the Belarusian territory. The date was probably chosen not by chance. It was the 25th of March, the Belarusian Independent Day. Going back to this structure where both Belarus and Ukraine were part of as republics of the Soviet Union, the Soviet Union was conceived as a confederation, meaning that there was a legal procedure of exit for its members under certain conditions. However, after the Second World War, and particularly with the emergence of nuclear weapons, the situation has changed, and Belarus and Ukraine were both the founding nations of the UN, but they were also the republics with most of the nuclear arsenal, Soviet nuclear arsenals in their territory. So just this very fact could make it more difficult to leave the Soviet Union if we were talking about this initial sort of possibility of Soviet Union as a confederation. It was no longer possible, and the Cuban crisis also made the world hold its breath while following the negotiations between Khrushchev and Kennedy, and called for politics of deterrence in the subsequent years to come. For Belarus and Ukraine, with their biggest arsenals of nuclear weapons on their territories, their membership of the Soviet Union was basically regarded as indispensable, and not only by Moscow, as I would try to show in my presentation. NATO members, also the United States, were also afraid of the disintegration of the Soviet Union because of the risk that the Soviet nuclear arsenals would be spread in several new countries with their own governments instead of being contained within the borders of one country. The international relations theory was dominated by this grand dispute between neorealists, neoliberalists, was taken by surprise, actually, by the sudden collapse of the USSR, and one of the few exceptions there was Zbigniew Brzezinski, who proposed scenarios not only of the Soviet Union, but also of Russia already back in the 1980s. Throughout 1990s, Zbigniew Brzezinski evoked the idea of the territory of Russia, of sort of disintegration of the territory of Russia into three new states: Moscovia, the Ural-Siberian Republic, and the Far Eastern Republic. This geopolitical project, according to its author, was supposed to make the situation better for Russia itself. Explaining that Russia was found itself in a difficult economic situation. Its demographic potential was not corresponding to the territories, to the huge regions that were part of Russia, regions like Siberia and Far East, and the physical compression of Russia to the limits of, as he called it, average European country, according to Brzezinski, would fit into Europe and stimulate its further economic growth. His project or justification of this sort of project that Brzezinski proposed was based on the fact that out of 146 million Russians in Siberia and Far East, there were only 32 million living. So moreover, the number of non-indigenous inhabitants in Siberia constantly decreased, especially in the north, due to difficult conditions of life there, such as harsh climate, constant changing, the difficulties with supplying the necessary necessary goods, and delays and non-payment of salaries and employment, etc., etc. So Siberia was bad connected with the center of Russia, and also regions like Primoria and Khabarovsk did not even have autobahn roads for communication with the European part of the country. Transport to Chukotka, Kamchatka, and the Magadan region, this is either aviation or movement of off-road vehicles on winter roads. So there were also projects for the separation of Muslim regions, so regions of Russia inhabited by Muslim population, and creating kind of probably a single Islamic state as a geopolitical ally for Turkey. However, all of this, to highlight is that Belarus as well as Ukraine were part of what can be called the Soviet Empire, or even going back in time, the Russian Empire, described by Brzezinski as the black hole, the only prospect of which is saw in splitting into independent states. As I highlighted in the beginning of my presentation, why this was particularly difficult after the collapse of the Soviet Union was because of the nuclear arsenals on the territory of both Ukraine and Belarus, but also other republics of the Soviet Union. Here on this slide, you can see the picture of two presidents, Russian president, the president of Russian Federation, Boris Yeltsin, and president of the United States, Bill Clinton. They used to get well along. They used to get along with each other. And there was even this illusion of a mature strategic partnership between Washington and Moscow in the early 90s, which would replace the former rivalry. And there was also, from the Russian side, there was this expectation that after the collapse of the Soviet Union, Russia will not only be the legal successor of the former Soviet Union, but also a de facto partner in the world order based on true equality. On the American side, again, citing Brzezinski, there was no intention, or there was never an intention to share a global power with Russia. And the US could not even do this, even if it wanted to. So therefore, we have probably some illusions, some miscalculations to deal with what was called, or what is called, the genius loyalty, the sort of space spirit. If we look at the post-Soviet space as a post-imperial space, or still the imperial space as such. So many geopolitical scientists in Russia, in Russia this is very popular, popular science, believe that economic, political, and military potential of modern Russia is insufficient to claim the role of one of the poles of the global world as it was hoping to. And therefore, they propose to position Russia as a civilizational pole, so-called Slavic Orthodox civilization. And the logic of reasoning is approximately the following: relying on the traditional spiritual and cultural values, primarily the values and ideals of orthodoxy, the Russian people managed to create the greatest state in world history that united many peoples. Non-possessiveness, the idea of collective salvation, the priority of public interest over personal, spiritual values over material ones, commitment to human eternal solidarity, patriotism, compassion. These are the basic principles of the Russian civilizational code, according to those who propose the civilizational model, civilizational concept of in Russian geopolitics. And these differences are especially pronounced in comparison with the Protestant teaching, which forms the spiritual basis of most European countries and the United States. So out of the the project, or the possible projects, possible options Russia could choose as the post-Soviet empire, first liberal concept, and maybe I put 2 times concepts just to assert. Well, liberal concept was not possible to implement in Russia for the reasons that we know. Large part of the population was disappointed with the liberal reforms, market economic reforms in Russia, and communists were still very popular. However, going purely with the communist concept was not an option either, and national socialistic concept had some bad reputation from the past, some bad connotations. Social democratic would probably be a good idea for many post-Soviet republics, not only Russia, to investigate, but somehow the choice was made between Eurasianism and this civilizational concept. And this affects its neighbors, Russian neighbors, first of all, Belarus and Ukraine, whom Russia regards as part of its civilization, of this big Russian civilization. And the mission of Russia historically is to embrace the territories of the countries which are sovereign, but in the civilizational concept, they belong to the Russian sphere of interest. Well, just for the fun of it, with this slide, and especially Eurasian mentality of the Russian people, because, this is like an image I chose to highlight. Well, we talk about the civilizational model, which should probably be based on soft power. So what is soft power in the Russian view? It's the economic structure of the society that is based on the leading economic model is community-based. Orthodoxy is the traditional religion of people. The state is a great power, and we can go on talking about this soft power, Russian soft power, which is extended beyond its territorial boundaries to what Russia considers its civilizational boundaries, including Belarus and Ukraine. So the virtues of national character, and this contradiction on the one hand, like such characteristics of Russian characters, an open soul and taking everything to heart, carrying and its cross and so on. But when the scholars made a survey in Russia, in fact, of which literary character represents best the Russian national character. So the participants actually considered Oblomov very simple-minded, kind, but lazy and inhibited, and Ostap Bender, daring, impudent, and cheerful businessman. But according to the respondents, the most Russian hero of national folklore is Ilya Muromets, hero, defender of Russian lands, and to a lesser extent, but still Ivanushka, the fool, and Yemelya from the fairy tale, at the command of the pike, at my will, and so on. So it's worth recalling that Ilya Muromets was sort of ill, meaning that he was not, he was resting on the stove until the age of 33, and he got down from it only when the sort of enemies approached the threshold of his native home. So when we talk about this Russian soft power, so what can be regarded as constituting Russian soft power in the period after the collapse of the Soviet Union, we have these special mental features that underline the national character. There are also other characters which are maybe more serious and who still have influence shaping the Russian politics, including the military operation, including the war in Ukraine. Catherine II and Peter the Great, for whom this Baltic Black Sea axis was an important geopolitical project to highlight, to assert Russia as a European power, first of all. So according to Catherine the Great, Russia is a European power, the Russian people are European people. And then, funny enough, she highlighted the same problem as Brzezinski in the 1990s, that it does not have enough people for such a vast territory. And it's difficult to find enough encouragement for the people to reproduce themselves. So the problem was already there from the very inception. And I cannot mention, but also mention the book by Radishev. I chose to call him the sort of blogger of that time, because he published this leaflet at his own expense, and it was so radical that he was sentenced to death by the empress, in fact. And then she spared his life on the occasion of the conclusion of peace with Sweden. Why this is necessary from the geopolitical perspective after the collapse of the Soviet Union? He wrote a book about going from St. Petersburg to Moscow, and this was regarded as the biggest crime by the empress, because you were not supposed to go from St. Petersburg to Moscow, highlighting all the difficulties that people were facing there, the common people facing how this the whole situation looked like. Capitals like St. Petersburg were, it was supposed to be a shop window for Europe, highlights the Europeanness of Russia. And going from St. Petersburg to Moscow was enough to sentence him to death. Going from Moscow to St. Petersburg would be highly welcomed. Going to her successor, Peter the Great, he continued her course and strengthened this bipolarity in the hierarchy of Russian cities, and in particular, yes, the Baltic Black Sea axis in the Russian politics. So from the geopolitical and geostrategic point of view, the western border that separated the Ruthenian middle space consisting of also Belarus and Ukraine, from the Swedish and the Polish ones, was the main subject, historically, the main subject and concern for the Russian rulers. And that led to the emergence of the besieged mentality when the Muscovite core territory arose on the periphery of the Orthodox and Catholic worlds, and Khaganate and the Golden Horde and the Hanseatic League feeling being surrounded by enemies all the time. And those kind of core areas surrounding Russia were Swedish with its Protestantism, Polish with its Catholicism, Ottoman Turkish with Sunni Islam, Persian with Shia Islam, and Chinese with Buddhism and Confucianism. The formation of the Russian Empire was accompanied by an increase in territorial expansion, as a result of which one border zone after another fell under Russian control, and therefore have the formation of the largest empire in the history of mankind, corresponding to the 25% of the land. And well, that explains also the problem that I stated in the beginning, whether this kind of extended territorially can exist, can be sustainable in the future. To take away the illusions about the beginning of 90s, on the one hand, we had, we observed Yeltsin's smile together with Clinton, stating that maybe Russia will be the equal power to the United States. And here we have a citation from the chairman of the Parliamentary Committee on Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation, who explicitly stated the former Soviet space, is an exclusively Russian sphere of geopolitical influence. And here is a map. I'm sorry for the quality, but it's a kind of antiquated one. The map of Russian military bases in the former Soviet Union, which are placed exactly in the perimeter of the former Soviet borders. So just if we imagine connecting the dots, then Kaliningrad, and then yes, Moldova, Crimea, Caucasus, and so on and so forth. So it's no wonder, I think, that the territories of Belarus and Ukraine got mostly exposed and let's say fragile to the Russian geopolitical influence. But the two countries chose different approaches, various reasons, and I will speak a little bit about Belarusian way, Belarus declaration of sovereignty from July 27, 1990. It was still the Soviet Union time. There were three main points highlighted.
Lizaveta, I'm sorry to interrupt you. We don't have to finish our panel at 5:50. So if you feel under pressure to have a very long presentation, no need to do that.
Okay, but so you want me to wrap up or to?
Yeah, I mean, you can wrap up within 5 minutes, and then we can have a discussion, maybe more about what you discussed on Ukraine-Belarus relations more generally.
Okay, excellent. I will take it. So yes, thank you so much for reminding me of the time. And I'm actually approaching the end of my presentation, but there's still some points that I would like to highlight here. This is about the key points of Belarus independence. Please pay attention to number 2 and number 3 as well, non-nuclear status and neutrality. They were important elements of Belarusian independence. The same goes for Ukraine, but with some reservations. As we know, for Ukraine, getting rid of its non-nuclear status was not that important as it was for Belarus. Some memoirs from memoirs of Clinton visiting Belarus. He was the one and only American president who ever visited Belarus since independence. He spent there, if I'm not mistaken, 6 hours or so. He didn't touch any food, and yeah, it was interesting to analyze those memoirs, because he would be, the way he was, he had a meeting with Stanislav Shushkevich, and well, they also seemed to get well along with each other, but the relationship was clearly asymmetric, and just judging by the fact that when Clinton arrived to Belarus, he did not leave his airplane for 45 minutes, leaving the leader of Belarus standing on the airport, outside the airport, and waiting for him under the rain. So it was already some kind of signal that, yeah, well, for the US at that time, the main issue with independent Belarus was to guarantee that Belarus would agree to have the nuclear weapons withdrawn from its territory. I skip those citations, although I think they're very funny, and go to the signing of documents and the withdrawal of nuclear weapons from Belarus to Russia in the Pentagon building. So after the collapse of the Soviet Union, we have both sort of a verbal, but also official, but also non-official agreement that Belarus would be a nuclear-free, neutrality-seeking country, and that the US and the Russian Federation would be warrants of this neutrality and non-nuclear status. The situation changed drastically on March 25th, 2023, when Russia announced the deployment of its nuclear arsenals in the Belarusian territory. And we can speculate how serious this is. We had a discussion in the Belarusian Research Network for Neighborhood Policy a couple of weeks ago, this topic with Lithuanian, Latvian, Polish experts, and I invite you to follow the website. There will be soon published a report on the assessment of this threat. And from my side, I thank you for your attention, and please feel free to ask questions both to me and to the previous panelist, to Olesia. I will shift to the role of moderator again, and at the same time, yeah, we'll answer the questions if you have any. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Lizaveta, and I guess I will need to help you because you cannot see the room properly. I can start with the first question, and the mic is here, so Peter, if you want to help with the mic. My question is for Olesia. I'm sorry to hear about your husband. I don't know whether you want to say more about it. It's entirely up to you. But my question is more generally about the level of understanding of what is going on in Belarus by Ukrainians in Ukraine. Because my understanding is that Belarusians sort of know, or at least in my circle, they know broadly what is happening in Ukraine. Even before the war, people sort of followed, the revolution of dignity and the invasion of Ukraine and so on. While when I speak to Ukrainians, many Ukrainians have very little understanding of what's happening in Belarus, and they would say things like, "Oh, why don't you just overthrow Lukashenko? We did it. Why haven't you done it?" Or they would, in the past, before the war, they would say, "Oh, Lukashenko is such a great guy. and so on. So the level of understanding is rather shallow. Maybe it's just me who met people who didn't have enough knowledge about Belarus, or do you think it's a bigger problem that this lack of knowledge? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, so I think that it is a big problem of lack of knowledge for Ukrainians and for Belarusians. As I said, two peoples live in their own fantasies about, so they don't know reality. They just act according to this like few pieces of information, general information they have. And this is the problem, and that's why people are asking like weird questions from the perspective of Belarusians, for example. So I can see that. So as I am in both areas, in Ukrainian and Belarusian, so I can see these points which cannot be understood for now, and civil societies of both nations have to do something to make people more aware about each other, because we are neighbors, and we have to know the reality and living conditions in which people live now in both countries. And of course, some people do not understand some basic things regarding to Belarusian society for now, and some people are pretty much aware of everything that happens, and it depends on people's interest. So if person makes an attempt to read something more than Wikipedia, for example, then person understands. And unfortunately, I've heard also some bad opinions, and of course these bad opinions stay at that level, like because people just do not understand. People were not interested in that, and all that had known that the story as you told, so, and that was all. So we have to work on it.
Thank you.
Thanks.
There's a question here.
Yeah, thanks. So I'm Rashid Chaudhry from Manisa Jalal University in Turkey, and I have a quick question for Olesia and also a quick comment for Lizaveta. So Olesia, you mentioned in your presentation, if I understood you correctly, that there's a certain Belarusian organization in Ukraine that presents on its website an outdated version of Belarusian identity, and I was just wondering, outdated in one sense, and according to whom? And what way? And for Lizaveta, when you say that the Russian Empire was the biggest empire in history, I think some of our British friends in this room may disagree, because as far as I know, the British Empire is quite a bit bigger. All right, thanks.
Thanks. So when I told the outdated Belarusian identity, I meant the like from my opinion, from my perspective, the late Soviet Belarusian identity was represented. So I've read they organized some events which was quite good, and the other was like event with singing songs, Belarusia. So as you can understand, it wasn't really about Belarus from 1991. And also, there was a letter to Yanukovych, the former president, pro-Russian president of Ukraine. There was a letter of support and something like this. So like it can be said that it was quite pro-Russian activities on some stage. So I think Belarus should not act in pro-Russian side. So for me, it's outdated. Thanks.
Yes, and there was a comment or a question to me about the size comparison of the British Empire and the Russian Empire in terms of size. Well, I was talking about the Russian Empire in present. I mean, I was talking about the current, the Russian Federation as an empire that is probably the last, one of the last empires left. I mean, not talking about British Empire in present, of course, we compare them in the past, but now it's the last empire left, which, if you followed my presentation, yeah, its size and population leads to economic discrepancies that will eventually lead to its collapse, according to the scholars that I was mentioning in my presentation. So it was just talking about the present Russia.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We're going to have Paul here for Hungary.
Thank you. My question is for Olesia. You described Ukraine-Belarus relations after February last year as having sort of become more dire. But at the same time, the Zelensky regime has kept, the Zelensky government has kept channels open with the Lukashenko regime, at least notwithstanding what happened last week with the visit of Denis Pushilin to Minsk. I just wondered if you could comment on the Zelensky government and the Ukrainian people's views of the Belarus opposition in Vilnius, around Tikhanovskaya, for example, and why you think they haven't engaged very much with that center in opposition.
Mm-hmm. Yes, so first of all, I would like to highlight that Belarusians often think that or say like Ukraine doesn't accept opposition and so on, meaning that authorities making some for my opinion, not really effective things, but it's not true, because Belarusian authorities and Ukrainian authorities and Ukrainian people are not the same. And regarding to the president, so I wasn't voting for him, for example. So obviously I'm not happy that he makes some mistakes from my opinion, regarding to the Belarusian civil society. So I think it should be done more strictly regarding to the opposition, but at this stage it cannot be done because of some previous acts of previous opinions of Belarusian opposition leaders. And so the Ukrainian authorities are afraid to lose points of electorate or something like this. So yeah, that's why they are quite silent on some stage. So it's regarding to the president and the office of the Ukrainian president. And on the other hand, there are some developments in Ukrainian parliament, Verkhovna Rada, who MPs launched the supportive group for Belarusians. So they're working on it as much as they can. And also, of course, there are many NGOs who supports Belarusians, who tries to develop these relations, and who work with Belarusians who live in Ukraine now, human rights defenders and so on, and tries to build these connections in right way and in a creative way.